time to sign on. So Larry or Cliff, would you two like to take over?
Yeah, Larry. Yeah.
Okay, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Larry Mason. I'm the president of the High Desert Association of Realtors. And Cliff?
Yes, and I'm the president of the Greater Antelope Valley Association of Realtors. And we're happy to be partnering with you guys today to bring Bill Dedman to you all.
Yeah, this is going to be great. So we're very fortunate today. We have with us Bill Dedman, one of the lead reporters on the Newsday undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. He designed the hidden camera project called Long Island Divide, which showed agents reinforcing racial segregation through illegal steering of home buyers. The project has launched investigations by state and federal authorities and several steps by the National Association of Realtors to increase awareness of fair housing issues. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Long Island Divide and its 40-minute documentary film, Testing the Divide, are online at newsday.com/divide. Highly recommend it. Bill is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter and #1 best-selling author of the biography Empty Mansions. He received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in investigative reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the Color of Money, his series on racial discrimination by home lenders in middle-income Black neighborhoods. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, and many financial institutions. Bill is going to address us how the test of real estate agents was conducted, the major findings, what can agents do to ensure fair housing treatment of consumers, and what training and resources are available.
Thank you, Larry. I'm probably going to call Larry Cliff and Cliff Larry throughout this.
I'm sure I've been called worse in my life.
I'm excited to have this opportunity to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's sort of surprising, it's gratifying that so many real estate associations around the country have responded to a newspaper's investigation and are using it to provoke an important conversation. So what I'm hoping that we'll get out of this is that together we can dive into some of the video clips from our video of agents in action, perhaps not on their best days. And more importantly, I'm hoping that we can discuss a few of the implications of this investigation, Long Island Divided. I'm hoping that we can talk about schools and about what agents can say about schools, about new training available, and also about some of the fixes for the problem of unequal treatment in real estate. And maybe we can analyze how far those fixes really take us. I trust that as real estate professionals, you will have your own reactions and thoughts. And I'm sure that all of you want to make sure that every customer is treated fairly. So what I'm hoping we get out of this session is that it'll be helpful to you in reaching that goal. It may be challenging, something to think about and something to take action on.
All right, great. Thank you, Bill. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us. First question I have for you is, you won the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. I thought it might be interesting for our viewers to hear a brief summary of that investigation, as well as to show how long you've been doing this and the breadth of it.
Too long, but I think it helps reflect on some of the lessons learned. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money, and they were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders doing business on one part of the map, but not another. This was back in the late 1980s, and redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. And we found that the largest lenders, banks and savings and loans, were making home loans in white areas of Atlanta, even lower income white areas, but no loans in black areas, even higher income black areas. Even the neighborhoods where Coretta Scott King and Andrew Young and the vice presidents from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines lived. And we looked behind these sort of maps of where loans were to look at how the banks operated. We found differences in where branches were located and where they'd been closed, in which real estate agents they marketed to, even in where customers could put in a loan application. And one lesson for me was how small actions could have a large impact in creating or in perpetuating a segregated system. I'd like to mention a later project at the Boston Globe on what we'd call racial profiling in traffic stops in Massachusetts. The series is online. It's called Speed Trap. And an interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that you were probably speeding. We all were. And you have no way to know if you're being treated the same as some other person who stopped. So if you get a break, if you get a warning, does everyone get one? If you get a ticket, was the officer treating everybody the same? You have no way to know. It's not unlike being a customer, unable to have any idea how other customers are treated. And what we found in Massachusetts was that who gets a ticket instead of a warning once they're stopped is easy to predict if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women get a break, especially younger women up to about age 40. It's just the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. Minorities rarely got a break, especially Black and Latino men. So there seemed to be some racial profiling at work in that decision made at the window by the officer. Now, with mortgages in Atlanta, with traffic tickets in Massachusetts, we were coming along later and we were looking at the pattern of what had happened, the result, and then we had to dig into how did the system work. What's different about Long Island Divided and our documentary film is that we're not coming along later. With the video cameras, you can watch people violate the law. I also thought that it really mattered that we name names. The other stories were about the banks or the police. You know, you could dig into the charts and see how areas compared. But here, as we'll see, you can see specific agents and their faces and the names of the real estate companies right on the screen. And I think that made a difference in the impact of the stories.
Bill, that's crazy interesting. The Newsday investigation has become the most prominent example of the existence of race-based bias in real estate. Why did Newsday start the investigation in the beginning?
Oh, so this is, many of you may not know Long Island. It is long. You can see it on a map of the nation, but we're talking about a 100-mile island that stretches east of New York City out into the Atlantic with about 3 million people in 2 counties. And this is an area that's heavily segregated. Depending on how you count it, it might be the most heavily segregated in the country. And what we mean by that is that there's a lot of diversity overall with people from all races and ethnicities and nationalities, but especially African Americans of whatever wealth are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, only 8 of those communities hold a majority of the African American residents, in just 8. We had long heard anecdotes from Black homebuyers who had encountered problems trying to buy a home in a wider or slightly integrated area. We'd heard this even from our own fellow staff members at Newsday. And we realized that testing was the only way to get at this. Testing by sending out pairs of renters or homebuyers has usually been done by fair housing groups or state or federal regulators. And it's the only way to see how 2 customers are treated we also noticed that there was an anniversary coming up. It was about to be the 50th anniversary of the Federal Fair Housing Act. So we thought this was a good chance to sort of take the temperature of how things were. So we followed these Fair Housing Agency methods. We added hidden cameras for video and audio. Now that's legal in New York. It's legal in most states to record audio without others in the conversation knowing that you're doing that. Most states require only one party to a conversation, and that can be the home buyer, to consent to audio recording. But hidden audio recording is not allowed in about a dozen states, including California. But you're not off the hook. Testing can happen anywhere. Testers can make video, and testers can take notes. Testers can be debriefed afterwards. They just can't record sound. Let me show you a little bit of a sort of an introductory part of our documentary film. The film is called Testing the Divide, and all the stories and all the video are at the address newsday.com/divided, and we'll put that address in the chat as well. The problem that's highlighted in this video clip was something we didn't expect. It's just sort of a barrier to entry, a failure to serve one customer at all when another customer in the same circumstance does get service.
We're not gonna like those schools.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different
I'm
areas?
not going to send you anything in one direction unless you don't want to start your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I guess? My husband's working with somebody in a bank. We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approved.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out any money unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Wow. All right, Bill, can you maybe give us a summary of the tests and who was tested and what was the outcome?
Yes, I think it's important for you to understand how we went about this and was it fair. Our Newsday team focused on home sales, no rentals, and we sent out first-time home buyers one at a time to see the same agent. We'd send a white home buyer and then separately an Asian home buyer, mixing up who went first, or a white and black, or a white and Hispanic, paired up. The testers, the home buyers, gave the agent the same circumstances and constraints on their home search. So they followed the same script. We were first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose people of the same gender and roughly the same age. We even dressed them in the same business casual style, same shirts for the men. I went to Nordstrom and bought purses for the women, so they'd have similar styles. They were asking about the same geographic area, within 40 minutes of downtown or within 20 minutes from this community, that sort of thing. They had the same family size and were asking for the same number of bedrooms. They gave the same stated price range up to X amount. And they were prepared to give the same answers if asked about income and credit scores, but usually there was no financial question other than mortgage pre-approval status, as you saw, and they were both in the same boat there. We shopped for houses from entry level, and in New York prices, not unlike your situation, entry level is about $400,000, up to the high end, about $7 million. Now, out on the Hamptons, $7 million won't put you next door to Alec Baldwin, but it'll get you within a quarter of a mile. But always the same price range for both people in the test. And they saw the same agent. Now, that wouldn't be necessary for a fair housing lawsuit. Two different agents at the same brokerage are also supposed to treat customers equally under the law. But we thought it would be more fair and more persuasive to have the same agent see both customers. How did we choose the agents? We didn't. The brokerages chose which agents got tested. Whoever was taking calls, whoever was on the board to handle walk-ins or calls or internet, email, that's who got tested. We did 86 of these matched tests at 12 companies or brands. These 12 together represent more than half of the homes for sale in our market. So Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, and the large regional brands. We tested each company many times. We didn't want to have journalists doing the testing. We were going to be the air traffic controllers, not the pilots. So we recruited and trained 25 testers. Some came from church groups, but mostly we used out-of-work actors because there are so many of them in New York. We would train them with their identities, how to answer questions in a neutral way. We dressed them the same. We rigged up the video cameras. The testers would meet with agents, receive listings, go on home tours, and then our team would handle the communication with the agents by email and text, posing as the home buyer, to make sure that that was done in a neutral way and we weren't injecting any preferences into the test. Then our team reviewed more than 200 hours of video to see how the customers were treated and analyzed and mapped the thousands of listings that they were given to see what school districts and communities they were in. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees. So we had two fair housing experts review each test for evidence of unequal treatment. One had run a testing program for the Department of Justice, and the other is the law professor who wrote the textbook on fair housing law. And only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we count the agent with a penalty. Then we didn't publish. First, we gave the agents and their brokerages the details so they could respond to our findings and what had happened with that customer and could come in and watch the videos if they wanted to, so they could respond before everything was published and before the videos went online. Now you can go on, you can see the videos, you can see the maps of the listings given to each buyer, and you can read what our experts said about each case where they found illegal activity by the agents. So this was a careful effort. It took more than 3 years. This is not a drive-by investigation to get a YouTube video. Now, the results overall, the agents gave unequal treatment in 40% of our tests, 4 out of 10. But it differed by race. Let me explain. 19% of the time, 2 out of 10, Asian buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts, 2 out of 10 times. 39% of the time, 4 out of 10, Hispanic buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts. And 49% of the time, half the time, Black buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts. Now, most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black customers, but I would say don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers or 2 out of 10 Asian buyers were treated poorly half a century after the civil rights laws were passed, then those seemed like high numbers as well. We viewed this as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they perform. It's fair to say, I think, that most of these major national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Only 2 of the 12 companies passed all of their tests, and we wrote about that. I guess the question you have to ask yourself is, would the results be the same or different if we repeated the test in Palmdale or Hesperia or in any other community in America? Most of the disparities were forms of what we would call steering broadly. For example, Black buyers got fewer listings the whiter the area was. So let's say a Black buyer and a white area, both asking about the same community, same area. In the whiter parts of that area, the Black buyer wouldn't get listings. Overall, the agents directed 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers, 1 out of 4, into different communities and different school districts altogether than they directed the white counterparts. Along with that were the agents who surprised us by refusing to serve customers. Usually it was because of pre-approval. Both buyers had no pre-approval, but that was a barrier for only one of them. There were also agents who wouldn't help our Black or Hispanic buyer unless they signed an exclusive contract with that brokerage, but they weren't requiring a contract of the white buyer and helped them without it. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents. And we were surprised by how much of this there was. It was always said to our white home buyer. So minority buyers would rarely hear anything inappropriate at all. And they would come back and say, gee, she was so nice. Here's a video clip highlighting the problem of inappropriate comments that were said usually to the white buyer.
Hispanic community came in, and they really took over Springs and Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. It's in the United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the
Bayshore has 2 school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you, I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your white diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word steer, but I try to use another word. I educate in the areas. You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ?
Hey, Russ.
Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just
Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No,
Oh.
like a horse, even.
I can add that the inappropriate comments are easy to focus on, that, they generate a lot of heat. I think they stick in our mind. I have a sense that some agents through the years have gotten the message that complying with the fair housing laws means not saying the wrong thing, or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it, as though it's some sort of political correctness. It seems that there needs to be more attention to steering, to differential treatment on what agents do, and not just on what they say. Are we giving the same advice to all customers? Are we treating all customers equally?
Bill, we've been talking about steering. What forms did this unequal treatment take?
So steering is an imprecise term. I use it a little loosely myself, but it's often used as a catch-all for various behaviors. And let's describe some of what we saw. Now, if you were showing one person an apartment while telling another person that no apartment is available, you could call that steering, or you could call that differential treatment. Telling one person that there's no housing in an area in your price range, you won't find anything there in that range. We heard that. And then we saw the same agent show housing in that price range to another buyer. Asking one customer for ID, but not the other customer, is differential treatment under the law. Making unsolicited comments about race or ethnicity or religion of people who live or have moved into an area, or about the schools, or comments about crime or resale values, as a way of encouraging or discouraging someone from living there. That's steering. Especially, as we saw over and over again, giving contrary information to someone, one person than another. Oh, you'll love Freeport. Oh, I wouldn't buy in Freeport, bad resale values. So we heard agents tell white buyers to avoid an area while encouraging minority buyers to look there. We also just saw giving more service to one group than another. Overall, our white testers got 50% more listings from the agents than their black counterparts. It was more equal for Asian and white and Hispanic and white. Now, we've been talking about this in terms of the individual buyers or testers, but look at it for a moment, neighborhood by neighborhood. Across all of our tests, we had a lot of mostly white communities where nearly all the listings that were sent to our white buyers, even though the minority buyers included those communities in their search circle. Those minorities were in effect shut out or steered around those communities. We also had something we didn't expect. We had minority communities where no one got listings, although homes were for sale and they were inside the area for both buyers. These are especially communities with even a modest black population, and the agents would steer around those for both buyers. Now, our legal experts said, well, wait a minute, who's got the lawsuit here? Both buyers do, both buyers are being steered, but so do the communities themselves, their governments, and anyone who's tried to sell a home in the last 10 years, and their listing brokers have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against companies that are steering buyers away from their communities because they're harming the resale values. Prices get lowered because there aren't buyers. Now, we're not saying that real estate agents created segregation. Many of you have read Richard Rothstein's wonderful book called The Color of Law, which lays segregation as something that started really with government action back in the 1930s. You would think, oh, we were always segregated. Well, no, there were racial covenants that came onto properties that were allowed at that point. Financing that was available only to white buyers when the new American suburbs were developed after World War II. And Professor Rothstein in The Color of Law really focuses on the government action, not the actions of appraisers or lenders or real estate agents. But it's fair to say that realtors through the years have followed the industry's segregation, not creating segregation, but too often helping to perpetuate it. Here's a video clip with just a classic example of steering. One man and his family are warned away from living in an area. It's unsafe. While another man, for his family, is told that it would be a good place to live.
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people. When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going to visit.
Do you want to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Wow. Bill, do you think that agents included in the documentary were knowingly steering? I mean, we can assume from the statement of some of them that they were, or do you think some of it is an unconscious bias?
I think this is an important question. Well, the first point is that it doesn't matter under the law. The Fair Housing Act and the local laws, your state and local laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. If an agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, that agent's violated the law. To remind you, those are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status. Family status, usually we mean having children or being pregnant. And you also have state and local laws that may include marital status or the source of their income or sexual orientation. Now, although it doesn't matter, the motivation, it is interesting to speculate about it. If you're going to stop something from happening, you need to think about why it's happening. Some agents may, in effect, be profiling. That is assuming that the person of color can't really afford homes in that price range or can't qualify for the mortgage or will be wasting their time, while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. One of the tricky things about profiling is that it's so ineffective. Usually we talk about profiling as though there's a decision between, well, on the one hand, it's a shortcut to success, but on the other hand, it might be politically incorrect. But experts say the real problem with profiling is that it doesn't work. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays video games or dresses a certain way is not a good way to predict who's a school shooter. And no, collecting weapons warning everybody to stay away from the cafeteria or to come to the cafeteria to watch. Religion is not a good way to identify who will be a terrorist at the airport. You see, that sort of net catches too many good people and not enough bad people. Similarly, race is not a good way to identify which customers can afford a home. It's just leaves money on the table. So it's ineffective. Profiling is ineffective in counterterrorism or policing or real estate sales. Besides, it's illegal. It's possible that some agents may think that they'll make money faster with less effort if they show people homes where you'll feel comfortable. You heard an agent referring to that, where there are not too many people of one kind in the area. So they might assume that a Black buyer would rather be in a home, an area with a lot of other Black residents. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Some people might, many people might not. So you leave money on the table and it's illegal. It's possible that some agents have a prejudice or a strong bias. I just assume that that's a tiny group and isn't enough people to account for as much steering as there is. It's possible that some agents, conscious or unconscious, might be sort of acting out of bias that they expect of others, sort of like a referred bias, you know, a referred pain. My jaw hurts, so it's causing my shoulder to hurt, whatever. Bowing to a bias that they expect from others in the market. So thinking that sellers may not want minority buyers to come to their home, or that maybe their neighbors who are potential customers as sellers in the future might not want the agent to bring minority buyers into the neighborhood. Or maybe that appraisers or lenders would be biased, so harder to get the financing, harder to close a sale. Now, there has been bias in lending and appraising, but under the law, none of that matters. You know, in a way, with these issues of race, it's easy to apply all the question to all the sort of heat to the question: is that person acting out of bias? Is that person being racist, or are they saying we're being racist? It's much more productive to apply light to the question: how does it work? How does it work in our community? How does it work in our office? What's our marketing? What's our procedure? And is what we're doing treating people the same? It's under the law, it's what you do that counts. I think it's also interesting to think about this from the home buyer's perspective or the tester's perspective. Our testers had been entirely unaware that they were being treated better or worse. Often we would have testers come back and say, she was so nice. She was really helpful, and had no idea until we showed them the video that they were treated differently than their counterpart. Here's a video where you'll meet some of our testers, but also you'll hear from a fair housing expert who works with testers frequently.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, you know, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, you know, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map, I remember
that. Yeah, he had the map and he's like, you know.
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, you know, crime, resale.
You know, one of the patterns that startled us was that agents, time and again, agents would begin their presentations to the buyers, beginning with a new customer, with inappropriate comments or with information that violates the Fair Housing Act. I mean, it was this standard spiel. That gentleman with the map, a second generation real estate agent, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had two different invasion plans depending on your race. It didn't seem to be offhand, casual comments or spontaneous spurs when somebody was cut off in traffic. No, this seemed to be the sales pitch, the standard guidance for how to narrow a search for you. I hate to say it, but it seemed that for these agents, steering seemed to be a big part of the service that they were selling.
Bill, what roles did schools play in the actions of the agents, do you think?
Oh, time and again, we heard agents explain to our buyers, everything is by schools. Now, if you step back, realize that American school districts are so segregated by race in most of America. America's schools overall are more segregated now than they were 30 years ago. It's hard to believe. So sending someone to a different school district can be the same as directing them to an area of a different race, even without mentioning race. Schools are the biggest ways that segregation happens and that steering happens. It was routine for agents to use schools as the sorting mechanism. This district is blue ribbon and that one is declining. But then often the agents would give different information to different buyers or warn a buyer about a particular school district, but then not give that warning to someone who had the same criteria for their search. Now, this is really complicated. The schools part is the hardest part of this. Around the country, some agents have picked up the idea that they can't talk about schools at all. You may have heard agents say, oh, I can't mention schools. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Agents can give straightforward, factual information. You can answer questions. You can refer customers to websites with information. The problem arises when agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, and customers may ask you to do that. Or when agents are making comments about the demographics in schools, and those comments would reasonably be expected to be steering those customers. We'll get into some more of the complexity of this, but here's a little discussion of schools from our video, and you'll see the law professor, I believe, in this clip.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is their race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you were not going to like those schools.
Now, here's where the school issue gets complicated. To stay on the right side of the law, you're perfectly fine referring customers to websites that have information about schools. And the most common information is school test scores. School test scores are complicated. Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. Sorry. School test scores tell you mostly how wealthy are the parents and how educated are the parents that send their kids to that school. Wealth in America is a very good predictor of education. It's a very good predictor of test scores of your children. Therefore, race in America is a very good predictor of test scores. A high-performing school might be one with higher wealth parents. And a school with lower test scores might be really the higher performing one because those kids come in with low test scores and they're bringing them up, perhaps. Now, I said this is the complicated part. Just recently, greatschools.org, you know that website which ranks schools, and many realtors refer customers to it, has realized this pitfall and is changing its ratings, especially in states where it was basing the ratings entirely on test scores. It's looking for a broader set of information because it realized that just relying on test scores perpetuates segregation. And NAR has recognized this as well and has spoken up in favor of this change and recognizes that there's more work to be done. NAR says there's more work to be done on this school conversation. Yes, we want to stay on the right side of the law. So we can talk about schools. You can answer questions about schools. You can give objective information. You can refer to other websites and the like. But we want to do what's right in addition to just what's legal. And so we need to realize that, the real thing is to dig into what's the person want to know? Do they care about lacrosse? We'll find them the lacrosse info. We'll encourage them to find out about the music programs. When visiting schools is allowed again, we'll encourage them to visit the schools. In other words, we'll get past using labels just such as good or nice or high performing, because those are vague and very subjective.
Bill, what was the reaction from the real estate industry and government?
Well, it's fair to say that we've raised some awareness of these issues. Locally in New York State, the governor and the attorney general have announced investigations. So those are continuing. And, often I'm asked, what happened to the agents in the videos? We didn't focus on trying to cause discipline for those particular agents. We're curious to see what will happen, but so far nobody's been disciplined. And but they were called before a state Senate hearing. The agents and their brokers sat together and testified on a Zoom hearing. And you can watch that online. It really was surprising. Some agents handled it pretty well and said, well, I can see now what you're saying, but I wasn't intending to say anything inappropriate, but I see how it could have been taken that way. And others got sort of a public thrashing. The agent you saw who said, follow the school bus, see what the mothers are. She was asked, well, why were you telling the customers to go look at who's waiting for the bus? And she said, well, I just wanted the customer to know where the bus routes were. And the agent who said, well, Hispanics are taking over this neighborhood, he said he meant that in a positive way. And one senator said to him, on behalf of everyone with a brain, I'd like to tell you how ridiculous you sound. After that hearing, the state Senate in New York unanimously approved new state requirements. They haven't been heard in the other half of the legislature, the assembly yet, but unanimously approved in the Senate is a new set of laws which call for more testing and which get the agents to pay for it. License renewal fees, part of that goes to paying for testing. And then if you're busted for steering while you're testing, then the fine you would pay goes to pay for more testing. It's very similar to traffic enforcement. If you want to stop people from speeding, you give tickets. And so it's clear that New York State is going to have more enforcement. Around the country, I think the biggest thing that's going to change is that the large brands are talking about testing their own agents. At the hearing in New York, one of the CEO of Realogy, which you know owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and Sotheby's International and others, said we should be testing our own agents. And NAR has said, hey, we'll meet you halfway. So the National Association of Realtors is putting together a sort of a cookbook, putting together how to do testing, what the laws are in your state, how to get the cameras together, how to work with fair housing groups and helping make connections with groups that could run the testing. Now, this would not be public testing. It would be proprietary, Coldwell Banker doing testing. But I think that would be a sea change if some state associations, I heard from Washington State, the president of the state association said, yeah, we should be testing our agents. If associations, if brokerages are doing testing, I think that might be the most significant response to come out of this. Christy's going to show a little video here that just describes those. There's no sound, so I'll talk it through. But they're new laws that are coming in New York. These were approved unanimously by the Senate. And they took their cues from the Newsday team's investigation. So you can see these are the changes. And, will this be a model for the rest of the country? I don't know. But more testing, added fees to pay for it, requiring standards for doing the same thing to pre-qualify customers. And we're not done. Better training, compensation of victims. One thing we found in New York was that the training of agents was required on fair housing and was very poor. Our team attended training and shared the curriculum with the experts who found that it was pretty jokey and pretty off topic, hardly mentioned steering at all. This first item here is essentially saying if you're a broker and you're handing over supervision to an associate broker, that person has just as much responsibility as you would have as a broker to meet the fair housing requirements. A key concern, I think, of the senators was how can brokers possibly be monitoring the performance of so many agents under the fair housing laws? They had trouble believing that there could be good oversight when one broker is responsible for hundreds of agents. And so they wanted to make sure that that responsibility stays with sort of middle management as it's passed down. So those were the biggest sort of national responses.
Bill, based on upon your investigation, what do you think are the best ways to combat racism in real estate?
Well, in a way, maybe the combating racism is too amorphous. So maybe the thing to do is to think about how to combat unequal treatment or ensure equal treatment. NAR has responded vigorously in several ways to this, and I think their efforts are very positive and worth mentioning. Before our stories landed, NAR had just hired a new head of fair housing effort, Brian Green, who came from HUD. He was the head of fair housing at HUD. And so, welcome to the new job, Brian. He was there a couple of weeks and our stories hit. And NAR's leadership has put together a program called ACT, A-C-T, A for accountability, C for culture change, and T for training. And I just want to mention a couple of things. First, under accountability, NAR has been working with state associations to see that their state licensing laws meet a national standard. It's not, NAR is not telling you what your state laws should be, but it's telling you whether your state laws meet a minimal national standard for fair housing requirements and enforcement. And that will encourage states with weak laws to add them, I think. And, you know, having an industry on the side of regulation, you know, maybe out of the idea that self-regulation is the best way to get there without being regulated involuntarily. But still, it's interesting to have an agency looking at better regulation of that industry. And the developing of the self-testing is the other big part of that sort of accountability part. So A for accountability, C for culture. The schools is the hardest part of that culture change, and NAR is working on that. The other thing to remember is that, I mean, you know, for example, that the Realtors Code of Ethics requires realtors to follow the fair housing laws. It's in your code of ethics. But you may not know that, at least during my lifetime, the same Realtors Code of Ethics required realtors to enforce racial segregation. It was a violation of your code to show a home in a white neighborhood to a black person. So let's acknowledge that cultures can be changed. And let's acknowledge that there's a long tradition in America of redlining, of blockbusting, of predatory subprime lending, of differences in appraisals. It was a study on appraisal differences by race just this year. And that these discriminatory practices carry down from generation to generation. So home equity is the money that the grandkids use to go to college. So, you know, it's important, and it may take a long time to change the culture. NAR has taken one approach to this, which is to put out some statements. There's a very interesting statement called a Fair Housing Declaration, which is sort of a personal statement of commitment to fair treatment, and it's worth reading. You can look up Fair Housing Declaration from NAR. The other part is to think more deeply about school recommendations. And then in its training, that's the last part of ACT, training. NAR has put together Fairhaven, which is a sort of a game, a simulation, and many of you may have tried it. I encourage all of you to do it. Just developed it after our stories in the past year. And it puts you in the role of the buyer, it puts you in the role of the agent. You can play it with different roles, and you can see how fair housing issues come in. You can watch your score. The goal is to close a certain number of deals in a certain amount of time, but staying within the fair housing laws. If you've already taken it, one thing you may not have noticed because you've passed all the questions is that if you fail a question, then you get more information. So you might go back to Fairhaven, and we'll put the link in the chat to Fairhaven. It's fairhaven.realtor. But if you answer the question wrong, they give you more help, and you see more videos. So it's fascinating to watch that. NAR has also put together some training on unconscious bias, and is developing a training course for brokers with the idea that brokers could then teach it to agents. And that's not out yet, but I think that is another interesting approach. So trying to come at this from all the different angles. Let me just add a personal idea about this. We're not real estate professionals. We were journalists doing this test, sort of like air traffic controllers, sending the testers out and then watching the videos when they came back. And we kept wondering, well, how hard would it be to stop steering, to stop treating people differently? And as lay people, some things we saw that seem fixable. It seems clear that agents don't have a rigorous standard for what they do and don't do with every new customer. Time and again, we saw customers come back, one with the fat folder and one with the skinny folder of information from the same agent. You can fix that. They were being pre-qualified in different ways. The selection of school districts was happening differently. Maybe, it's funny because I've had agents say, I've been in this business 50 years and I've never seen any discrimination. But you understand that just as one customer would have no way to know what areas some other customer was given, you have no way to know whether two different customers who've seen your colleague were given the same areas. You have no way to know if you're giving the same areas as one of your colleagues is given out. The listings are the same for two different customers. And so that falls to the supervision of the brokers. Who in your office is looking at that? Who does any checking at all to say, what were their criteria? Why'd we give them this area, but not that one? NAR's advice about that is follow objective criteria, right? Number of bedrooms, price range, area, not vague subjective criteria like nice or safe or desirable. I guess as a layman, the question I would have is, why do realtors need to be choosing areas at all for buyers? If two people come in, why not give them both all the listings that meet their criteria? Will they think you're not a good agent if you do that? But as long as you're making choices, how do you know that you're making the same choice for every customer? How do you know that everybody in your office is making the same choice for every customer? Here's just a little strong gargle, but here's just a little 1-minute clip from our law professor on this topic of equal treatment.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you've got two people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listing? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Well, there's a strong statement. What I would encourage you to just think about, and we'll move to any other questions that you have, but is to think about, usually in a diversity situation, what people talk about is more diverse office locations. And certainly in our area, the areas with minority population didn't have real estate offices from these 12 companies. So they probably didn't know those areas very well. Diversifying your workforce, these things can matter. But just as in policing, unequal policing can happen by police officers of any race or ethnicity, just as we saw steering by real estate agents of various races and ethnicities. So diversity could be helpful, but it doesn't actually seem to be the fix here. The fix here seems to be, how does it work in our office? What's our procedure? Let's pay attention to the possibility of unconscious bias, and let's ask ourselves, why did we eliminate certain areas? But also, why do we need to be eliminating areas at all? So it may be that the best way to stop illegal steering is to stop steering at all. That's my view. I realize that quality control is very difficult in an industry where agents are self-motivated, independent, working from home or out of SUVs. Some are part-time. I realize how hard it is to set standards in that. And so if we all realize that, we realize how it requires more vigilance to see that everyone's treated the same. I assume that you want to make sure that everyone who calls or emails or someday walks into your office is treated fairly. So what I'm hoping you'll do is share our video, share it with customers, share it with your team, but then start a conversation not about things that produce heat, who's prejudiced in our office. That's not a very useful conversation. But how does it work in our office, and what can we do to make sure that everybody's treated equally? That might help. I think the Fairhaven simulation offers a lot of promise. If everybody in your office goes through that, it takes about an hour or so. I think that offers promise of sort of opening eyes to some of the pitfalls in going through a purchase or sale. I appreciate you taking this time, and I know that you may have collected some other questions or typed them in the chat, and I'd like to hear any other questions that you have.
Bill, we have one question are we required to do business in all cities in California?
It's a difficult question. There's a stronger requirement with banks than there is with other regulated businesses about areas. But if you decide my area is Palmdale and I only handle Palmdale, then you can decide that. You don't have to say, you're okay. If you want to say, I don't show any homes outside Palmdale, or I don't represent any sellers outside of Palmdale, you can do that. The problem is that if you have a rule with some customers or some situations, but then it's not a rule with others, that's where you're going to get, right? That's where you're going to get into trouble. And if there is a fair housing implication of that, you're choosing an area that's wider than another area, you're choosing an area that's different in some other way, then if somebody can come along and spot that, you're applying it, sometimes, but not other times, and there's a fair housing implication, that's where you're going to find yourself in court and in the newspaper. So that's where your reputational risk or your legal risk comes in.
Okay, if a buyer wants in a safe area with good schools, are we supposed to ignore crime rates and school ratings?
Yes.
Okay.
I think any lawyer or broker who's handling the reputational risk is going to tell you that what you should do is give them all the listings. Not everybody means the same thing by safe. Not everybody is going to choose the same areas as safe. For example, a lot of crime ratings that people look up online, they're based a lot more on property crime than things that really make you unsafe. We found crime ratings for communities on Long Island, and there are no crime stats for communities on Long Island. The communities don't give them out. We can't even get them in the newspaper. It was just made up. I think there's a lot of risk in working from that sort of subjective, and that's where you probably get in the most trouble, is when someone invites you to get into trouble. Tell them to do their homework. Tell them there's lots of websites where they can look up all the communities, and they should go visit all the communities that they are interested in. They need to do their homework.
What if a seller doesn't want to sell their home to an investor? Like they want a family to own their family home.
Well, it's complicated. I'm not a lawyer, but I'll pass on what I've heard, which is, I don't think the investor thing is such a bad problem. I think if you're going to say no investors, I won't sell to investors. Investor is not a protected class under any of your fair housing laws. That's not a violation. Family, you just got into trouble. What was one of the protected classes?
Family, familial status.
Familial status, which can be having children or not having children. That's especially where you need to get into the fair housing implications of these buyer love letters. And that's a topic for another seminar, but there are a lot of fair housing implications. And I have heard now from many agents who dug in their heels and just tell their sellers, sorry, if we get any of those letters, I'm not going to give them to you. Because what happens is you're just tempting the buyer to choose the tempting the seller to choose the buyer who looks like them, who has kids like their kids, who look like they want the neighborhood to look like. And you're just going down a fair housing nightmare right there.
Okay. What if the buyer asks me, would you live in this area?
Well, it's not up to you. Part of the problem is that affinity really seems to come into it. Not everybody wants the same thing in an area. You know, you can answer a factual, you can say, oh, you know, my kids went to this high school. If they ask, what do you know about that high school? You can say, my kids went there. They had a great experience except for the language teacher or whatever. You can say that. But some people want lacrosse and some people want music. Everybody wants something different. My brother's married to a doctor and had a hard time getting shown homes in an integrated area because a doctor's family doesn't want to live in that. Must have been the assumption from the agent. Everybody wants something different. That's where you need to tell people to do their own research. Let me give you a little example of how affinity comes into it. And I bet this qualifies as unconscious bias. We didn't count anybody out of bounds for this, but we kept noticing that our agents and our tests were more likely to tell white buyers what community the agent lived in. Far more likely. Of whatever race the agent was. If it was a white buyer, they were more likely to tell the buyer where the agent lived, what high school their kids went to, and to talk up, you'll really like it in my community. That's where I raised my kids. We had one white agent who offered to find babysitting for our white buyer in that neighborhood. You move into our neighborhood, I know people who will babysit for you. Went that far with the conversation, but didn't tell the minority buyer even what community the agent lived in. Now, that alone is not a fair housing lawsuit, but I assure you, when your listings are different to the two buyers and you're on the stand, that bit about the babysitting is going to come up in the questioning. So it's not a case by itself. A lot of these comments don't make a whole case. Focus more attention to the listings because the listings are the hard evidence that are going to get you in court. Does everybody get the same listings or all the listings that meet their criteria? I hope that helps.
Next question is, what is my responsibility when a seller wants to sell to a family or to a vet or someone they can identify with?
Your responsibility is to tell them that it doesn't work like that, that it's a regulated business, that there are laws. And just like any other law, you like your license, you'd like to keep your license. They're not the last seller you're ever going to represent. And I'm sure you want me to obey the law. And so the way it works is you declutter and leave the house and I show the house and we take the best offer and I'm going to get you the best price, right? I mean, you'll have your own speech about that, but we're not going to pick people based on who they look, how they look or what car they drive or who we think looks like they belong in the neighborhood or who has kids or who likes the swing set and will play on it. The best offer might be somebody who will take the swing set away, and that's just part of selling your house. I mean, that's right. That's you're all in the sales business. You'll know much better than I would how to say that message, but sometimes you have to push back. I've heard from agents who've said, I just have to tell people, well, no, we're going to violate the law if we do that. We're going to stick within the law.
That's all here's another one. Is it safer to advise clients to do their own research on what school is going to be best for their kids, even if a client asks my recommendation?
It is far safer to do that. Yes. If what you tell clients is true, And if you tell the same thing to every client, you're actually okay. You're within the law. If you want to say, you know, the 3 school districts that people want most in this community are these 3 high schools, you can say that. Now, you might be perpetuating some segregated views when you say that, not intentionally, but you might be helping perpetuate the idea that, oh, whiter is better and when it comes to schools. So let's acknowledge that. But just as a matter of law, if what you say is factual, and if you give the same advice to everybody when asked, you're okay as a matter of law. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I've heard this repeatedly from our legal experts. If you give the same advice to everybody, and if you give factual information, it's good, best, blue ribbon, declining, it's these judgments. And also, I mean, let's be honest, some of you are former teachers and principals, perhaps, but how did real estate agents begin to be real experts on schools? Most of us are not experts on schools. And there may be changes in schools and a great new principal and who knows what else going on that we don't know about.
I think that's all the questions we have on our chat box. So we really appreciate your being with us today.
I thank you. Thanks to Larry and Cliff and to those behind the scenes who made this happen. Christy, Diane, Pamela, I appreciate everybody who helped make this session possible. Our video and stories is at newsday.com/divided. And all the stories are there. And if you scroll down just about a screen there, you'll see a video that's the full sort of 40-minute documentary film. And, you know, get some popcorn. I encourage you to share that with your Facebook friends and your colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bill.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So since we don't have any more questions, we're getting tons of thank yous, Bill, in the chat. Just wanted to let you know that. Everyone's saying great information. Thank you very much.
You're very kind. I appreciate you. Thank you.
So, and with that, Cliff, my partner in crime, any comments from you?
No, I just really appreciate being a part of this, and the information that you shared today, Bill, was really helpful, and it just will help us to continue to improve at what we do, hopefully. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. You guys everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Everyone have a great day.
Yep.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye.
Bye. It was good seeing everybody.
Definitely.